Well, welcome everybody back to the Good Medicine Podcast. We're excited today to have with us Zeke Misner, who is the National Director of Life Sciences at Medix. And he's been in this role for just 10 years now. It's been there for a little while. So we're going to have a great discussion today talking about clinical operations and clinical trials, and specifically how clinical trials are run, what the good things and bad things are about clinical trials, and what the future looks like in terms of how we're using new technologies and new approaches to strengthen clinical operations and clinical development, and how that impacts good medicine. So Zeke, I'm so glad to have you here, and glad that you could join the Good Medicine Podcast.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciate the invite and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, great. Well, why don't we just kick things off and tell us a little bit about what Medix is and what your role there is. And then I'd love to talk a little bit more about your background and how you got into life sciences and medical research. And it's always fascinating to me to find out how do people actually end up doing the jobs that they're doing. So if you want to just tell us a little bit about Medix, and then we can roll right into your background.
Yeah, 100%. So Medix started 24 years ago. We started as a healthcare staffing company, headquartered out of the greater Chicago area. We've expanded since then. We have 20 plus brick and mortar offices across the United States. So markets like Irvine, LA, Seattle, San Diego, all the way over to New York, Boston, Raleigh, Tampa, and everywhere in between. We provide, at our core, staffing solutions within three verticals: healthcare technology, and life sciences. I work as our National Director of Life Sciences. So my full 10 years here, as you mentioned, just hit that mark, has been within our life sciences vertical. So it's been supporting biopharma, pharma, medical device, diagnostic organizations, and all the vendors underneath them, from bringing a product from really early stage discovery or R&D all the way through commercialization. So we have teams here built to support an organization, whatever kind of chapter of that storybook they might be in, to find them the best possible talent, resources, people to help bring that product hopefully to life into the market to support individuals
awesome.
and patients. And so it's been a fun ride. To your point, you would have asked me in a high school Zeke if he was going to be staffing life sciences, and it would have certainly been a no. I maybe still held my dream of playing in the NBA at that point. But I had a mom. My mom was incredible. She was the one that raised us. She was a very prominent pharmacist here in the greater Phoenix area where I live. My dad was in the education space, working as a superintendent for a school district here in Arizona. And I always just kind of gravitated more to the medical field. Might have been my mom not letting me go anywhere else. And so I went to University of Arizona. I did my undergrad. Ultimately, I finished with my bachelor's degree in anatomy and physiology. It was a wild ride in between there to get to that major. It was a pre-pharmacy major. My mom made me take a pharmacy tech licensure exam, passed that, and then she used me as free labor at one of her hospitals during the summers. Worked at the 24/7 poison control center down in Tucson overnight, helping field calls from usually kids that eat too much toothpaste was the majority of the calls. And so really just, aggregated all these different experiences. And ultimately med school was what I wanted to do. I switched to a bachelor's degree in anatomy and physiology, and then had one more kind of inflection point. I had the opportunity to shadow some field device sales individuals in their markets in southern Arizona, and just fell in love with it. Fell in love being really close to the sponsor, the device company, growing market share, talking high level with key opinion leaders, and it really just resonated. And so when I graduated, didn't have too many plans outside to get that person's job that I shadowed. Really failed at it. Had so many interviews, couldn't get the job, and so I winded up my dad's path. I was in the education space for about 3 years, really just fell into it, and still had that passion though to get back into obviously the life sciences space. And so I interviewed. I actually had a few roles finally lined up to move into the medical device space, but I had a friend that worked at Medix. They were building something incredible within the clinical trial space here, again, 10 years ago. And I certainly enjoyed taking that conversation and starting here with Medix. And so been here since, and it's been an incredible journey. And so honestly, fell into is certainly a great descriptive term of how I got here for sure.
Oh, that's great. Well, it sounds like, it's always fun to hear people's background because you and I have something in common. I was at the University of Arizona. I was a professor there for a while. When did you actually graduate? I wonder whether I was there at the same time.
2012 was the graduation for bachelor's.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I'm a lot older than you. I think I left the University of Arizona in 2003. So I was there a long time ago. I was at the Cancer Center, and then I actually was on the main campus. I was a professor in the Department of Cell and Molecular Biology. So. Yeah, you took a cell biology class. You probably took a class from one of my old colleagues there. But I love Tucson. Tucson was a great place, and University of Arizona, I really still have fond memories about my time there. Yeah, it's funny how fast time flies. It feels like that was just a few years ago, but it's been 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago since I've been there. But I'd love to get your perspective just in the 10 years that you've been involved with really looking at staffing for clinical operations and in conduct of clinical trials. What's changed in the last 10 years? What's different now than there was 10 years ago? I know from my perspective, obviously I've been involved in multiple biotech companies and run a lot of clinical trials. And clinical trials are the best of times and the worst of times for biotech companies, right? It's the culmination of a lot of work that's gone into the discovery and the validation in the laboratory of new mechanisms, new biology, a brand new shiny new drug that everybody's excited about. And then you get into clinical trials, and that's really where the actual drug discovery happens. You don't know if you have a drug until it's actually in people, right? I mean, that's the hard part about what we do. We can, I tell people all the time, I've cured so many diseases in animals and in the lab, but translating that into people is really challenging. So what do you see that's different today than 10 years ago, and what's better and what's worse than 10 years ago?
Yeah, a lot. There's some things that are still the same. Still recruitment struggles. They say 80% of trials failed to meet their enrollment goals by the timeline that they have. 20% of assets, I believe, are closed or terminated due to not meeting their enrollment goals. And so there's certainly some stuff that continues. But to your point, there's a lot of stuff that has changed to hopefully address that. And always the things like cost and speed and so on. And one of the easiest ones that we can look at are things like decentralized clinical trials, remote monitoring, wearables to drive that data into, as you alluded to, kind of maybe an AI engines of sorts in terms of companies that are pioneering that. I think you've gone from big swings of these big contract research organizations with very predetermined paths in terms of cost and what you get, to the FSP model where it's a little bit more ad hoc, pick and choose. Then you swing back to the insourcing and bringing everything back in-house. And so I think a combination of, I think there's ebbs and flows, and there's, in certain senses, we've gone back a little bit to what we did 10 years ago, which is a little bit more of lean, ad hoc, plug and play, need you for this long, need you for this long, need you for this long. Whereas, again, before, there's a lot of contract research organizations that had a really firm grasp over a huge market share when it comes to everything ClinOps, everything data management, everything biostatistics. And I think certain things such as personalized medicine, really rare disease studies, technology advancements have really empowered, I'd like to believe, sponsors in using selective vendors for certain, obviously, aspects of their trial, but have a little bit more confidence and honestly maybe need a little bit more control, as this has really taken off in terms of regulatory pathways, AI, different things along those lines, to hopefully bring a little bit more control in-house and having some of those operational key players next to them. And so I know that's a lot. It's certainly a hodgepodge of this ecosystem of what clinical trials is. But I do believe, again, tech, much like every chapter, as I mentioned, of this storybook, has certainly had an impact. And I think that would be certainly the biggest thing that's different today than it was 10 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with you. And your opening comment to the answer, that recruitment still remains one of the biggest challenges that we have. And I think we've many times we've thought, oh, we've got this solved. That precision medicine or personal, whatever we're calling it nowadays, right? They've changed the nomenclature a little bit, but our idea was, back in the day that we developed drugs for specific diseases, and we tested them across the whole disease, and then we said, well, no drug really works for everybody. Diseases are so complex that there are certain people that might respond and other people that don't respond to drugs. And if we can get better at figuring out this drug isn't for everybody, it's only for these subset of people. And we felt like, oh, that's going to solve a lot of these problems. Because I think one of the challenges with recruitment is that, you go to a person, especially if they have a life-threatening disease, it's a real challenge to go to them and say, hey, try this out, that we don't know that this is going to work. They have a limited window to try something, right? If you're a cancer patient and you failed the standard therapy, and then you're turning to a clinical trial and somebody says, hey, we're not sure this is going to work, but we think it has a good chance. You don't have too many shots at that, right? So you have a limited window to say, I want to try something that has the highest probability of success for me. And it's tough from a patient perspective to really understand and to know what's happening. And the other challenge that we have running clinical trials is that, we always want to have a comparator to say this drug is better than this drug. And everybody wants the new drug, right? And so if they go on the clinical trial, they don't want to be randomized or be assigned to the arm that has the older drug. And so we've struggled to try to figure out how do we get better at being able to address some of these issues that really impact accrual and recruitment on studies. And I think we've made some progress, but like you said, I think it still remains the biggest challenge. And it is, the statistics that you quoted, it is a killer for a lot of, especially smaller companies, being able to accrue a study and to stay on timelines, especially to get the right numbers of patients on trials, is very, very challenging. And so, I think we've tried everything under the sun, and we're always looking for something new. And so you mentioned some of the new things that we're thinking about is, can we use new technologies to help solve some of these problems? And what do you see happening? You mentioned decentralized clinical trials, and I think that's a concept that is not just an idea; it's actually happening, and we see it being implemented now. And why don't you help our audience understand the difference between a classic clinical trial that has specific sites that are participating in a more decentralized trial, and how that might address some of the issues that we have with getting connected to the right patients. BioHive is a nonprofit building, branding, and bringing together Utah's fast-growing life science ecosystem. Get involved today. BioHive's Women in Technology and Science community hosts events for anyone and everyone wanting to support women in life science STEM. And BioHive's Health Tech Hub community hosts events for those operating at the intersection of health and technology. Register for events and see what's buzzing at biohive.com.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's certainly one that is a big lever that is being yanked on to try to change that recruitment outlook. To answer your question, traditionally a clinical trial, for the most part, and we'll talk about just a traditional general medicine trial, maybe a phase 2 trial. Most of the time, you're going to have multiple methods of marketing that trial to the masses, that community around that site that's running the trial. At that site, you'll have an investigator, a physician, sometimes a sub-investigator, which will be a physician assistant, a nurse practitioner, someone along those lines, and then trial staff, data coordinators, regulatory coordinators, clinical research coordinators, research assistants, so on and so forth. And it's just like a general medicine practice in terms of a flow. You come in, you meet traditionally with a nurse and a coordinator. They're going to go through some basic education, medical chart review, maybe some inclusion exclusion criteria. Maybe they do the consenting of the study participant. You then see your investigator, the physician. They kind of double down on a lot of that information and add certainly some more there in terms of educating that participant on the study. And then you have to come back. Each protocol is kind of the Bible of that study. It's going to tell you 25 days or 30 days, or if this happens, come in sooner. But it's very much get in your car, get to the site, go back home. Get in the car, get back to the site. It's very much a manual, have to go in, you have to follow up, and not just patient recruitment, but retention, having somebody come in and making sure there isn't, maybe a protocol deviation where they come in and out a window visit or different things along those lines. And the busy lives that we have, that's the first piece. But the second piece is really two things that I think we're seeing a huge help with. Number one is really the socioeconomics of it, and where some of these trial sites are located. Some patients that could benefit just can't get there. And even in places like in Atlanta or Los Angeles, where it could take forever to travel to some of these locations. Number one, those sometimes it feels like a pay to play, even though you don't pay to be on the trial. You have to have some sort of means and ability to get there. Yeah. And so that's the first piece. And then the second piece that we've seen it a ton here recently are really for the patients that can't get there. It's not that they don't want to, or it's maybe it's an inconvenience. It's the maybe rare disease pediatric patient that it is a van and equipment and sometimes a nurse that has to get in this van to drive an hour to. It's just not feasible. And so decentralized clinical trial companies, there's a ton of vendors out there, a lot of sponsors taking the reins on their own that are bringing trials to people's homes. And so through a whole bunch of exhaustive efforts, it really has been, let's put a phlebotomist, a coordinator, a nurse, a sub-investigator on the road, going into the home, every single visit, being hands-on, drawing blood, utilizing, in some cases, a doctor going there too, or working virtually in a telemedicine fashion. But now we're starting to get all of these different wearable technologies and even better biomarker abilities through companies like AI Cure that's working with Science 37. They have a smartphone camera that can make sure that you ingested your medicine, or it can look at visual or auditory or behavioral cues that can really see if something in your speech pattern or physical movement can signal something, a treatment response or a prognosis or something along those lines. And that's always the fear, is that if I don't have the physician looking at them at every visit, will the FDA be okay with it? Will we get quality data? Will it be compromised? And we're starting to see helping, number one, recruitment numbers ultimately, but number two, hopefully bringing those trials to patients that otherwise can't gain access to them. And it's through this, again, whole network of ecosystem of things that have really taken off outside of just put a nurse in a car and bring them into a home.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. And like you said, I think that 10 years ago, a lot of the technology wasn't there. So this is all new stuff that we're starting to see the benefits of being able to bring that care to people as opposed to bringing people to the care. And I'm a big proponent of trying to help democratize access to care. I just think that one of the great tragedies of our modern world is that your zip code determines a lot of your outcomes for a lot of diseases, and that's just sad because we do have the ability to deliver medicine better than what we've been doing. So in the clinical trial world, I think this is where a lot of this is being tested and being shown that, hey, this actually does work, and you can get good quality data. And we live and die by data, right? That's and having data that we can trust. Like you said, there's wearables, devices. I wear a watch that monitors all kinds of things, and being able to record that and have continuous monitoring of things that we've never had in the past. I mean, those are all exciting, and I think really changing the landscape of the way we think about how a clinical trial can be done. I think at the same time, I'm excited about the idea of trying to change the traditional comparators that are done in clinical trials. So I mentioned one of the challenges, especially for life-threatening conditions, is people really do not want to be on the old drug. They want the new, latest and greatest thing. They heard, hey, I heard that this thing could, this could be a huge breakthrough, and they get randomized to the other arm of the trial, and we try to blind things, but in some cases it's very clear whether they got the new stuff or the old stuff. I mean, it can't be 100% blinded. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to think about, can we use real world data, which is, if these old drugs, we've been using them for a long time, we certainly know what their outcomes are, what they should be in a population. And so tell us a little bit about what you guys are thinking about of using synthetic controls in clinical trials, and what you're seeing in terms of digital twins and those types of things. So this is a big challenge in clinical trials. I tell people all the time, I think the general population has no idea that when we do these studies, a few patients can swing a study one direction or another. And if you just by random dumb luck get the wrong patient assigned to the wrong arm of the study, it can swing outcomes of the study. And I tell people all the time, if I'm running a clinical trial and I have, let's say I'm developing a breast cancer drug, and it's a randomized trial, and so the patient can go on whatever the old regimen is for breast cancer, or it can go on this new shiny drug that I'm excited about. And, we get two women that get assigned to this trial, and one of them's a marathon runner and is in really, really good shape. And the other one is, overweight, type 2 diabetic, we can't stratify for everything, right? So we stratify by their age, and we stratify by their gender, and there's not a whole lot. Like we can't say, hey, we want somebody that exactly 10 different things, because we'd never accrue that study, and so we have to put people that are not the same people, right? So we put that one patient goes on one arm and the other goes on the other arm. We can already tell the outcomes are probably going to be different for those patients just because of their baseline. And that really is a challenge as we start to look through the data and say, well, of course, this patient has a better outcome than that patient just because they came in the trial in better shape than the other one. But we can't bias the trial that way. But we are thinking about how can we use technology to overcome some of those limitations. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of those types of ideas, and how maybe using artificial intelligence can help us discriminate between, hey, this person, there's real world data that exists for this person that looks an awful lot like that, and how we could run a clinical trial that way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I call like RWE and RWD really came on. There's always these waves, and I always use the hopefully Wayne Gretzky analogy, and that you skate to where the puck's going.
That's right.
And it always, it always feels like that. There's always those waves from big data back in the day to, again, real world evidence to, as we just talked about, decentralized trials and remote monitoring, of course, generative AI and some of those pieces now. You're always trying to go there, and we're just starting to, I feel like we're getting there. Again, a lot with vendors. There's players like in Silico that is incredible within this space. But ultimately, every conversation that I'm brought into, and it's always a unique perspective from a vendor myself, in that I get brought in with these NDAs with hundreds of companies, and it's fun because you get to see all this different stuff, and you take a little piece here and there, and hopefully provide this consultative approach. And to your point, number one, there's one half of it, which is the personalized medicine, and just like, we know that we can help this person, let's do it in a smarter way. And the second piece, which honestly is a lot of it, is cost. Bringing in a participant for placebos and having that control arm is incredibly expensive. And so if you can use that real world data to be able to create these synthetic control arms. So to your point, digital twins, which is amazing. I certainly won't get into it in a ton of detail because you're going to see right through me that I don't know a ton about it. But getting asked to staff a lot of incredibly smart people like machine learning scientists and computational biologists and AI engineers all across the country for this, where they can like take this biological and these clinical data and these endpoints and simulate how this treatment would certainly work within the real world is incredible. Because to your point, sometimes going in and even the fact that you put this patient through this and they hope that they got the magical drug, but it's a placebo sometimes a tough ask too. And so we are seeing it. And I think, huge cost savings is really to a certain point at the forefront of it. But I think really the end goal here is give the person the medicine they need. And as you kind of do that from a very simple perspective, you can then really start focusing that and really focusing on looking at those genomic data and some of those pieces, and even better dosing, or even, all these different factors that you can really change to get the best possible drug for them. And so we're seeing it a lot through what we're being asked to staff, mainly for vendors right now is where we've been focusing the most, and companies that are just doing incredible things.
So tell us a bit about your experience with studies that have biomarkers associated with them versus ones that don't, and what biomarkers do to the outcome. And just so that everybody's on the same page, we talk about a biomarker. So when we run a clinical trial, we in the old days, when we were developing things like cancer drugs, all we cared about was survival. It's just like, does this patient live longer when I give them this drug, or when I give them the old drug, or the other standard of care. And then we started to get better at managing people, and doing survival studies when you have people living longer and longer become harder and harder. And so we had to start to create other endpoints for clinical trials where we looked at things that weren't necessarily a survival based. And survival's great because it's black and white. Like there's no subjective, it's is the patient alive or are they dead, right? That sounds terrible, but that's literally what the old school type of endpoints used to be. And now we have all kinds of endpoints that we can look at. And some of those endpoints we call surrogate endpoints, which means that we're moving a pathway that's associated with a real clinical benefit, but we're not necessarily measuring the clinical benefit as a primary endpoint of the study. It's this surrogate. And most of the surrogates that we've developed, we measure with laboratory tests that we call biomarkers. So things that people would be very familiar with would be cholesterol, right? So cholesterol lowering is a surrogate marker for cardiovascular disease. We've shown that if you have high cholesterol, you have a high risk for developing cardiovascular events in the future. So instead of developing a drug where we measure, how many heart attacks does this person have, or how many heart attacks, we measure, can we lower cholesterol? Because we've shown that if you lower cholesterol, you will prevent, cardiovascular events in the future. So biomarkers have started to really change the way that we think about clinical trials, and I'm curious about where you see kind of the movement happening, and what's exciting right now in the world of biomarkers, and how do biomarkers actually change the outcomes for clinical trials?
Yeah, it's great. And to your point, and just to echo what you say, they really are there to, within the clinical trial, guide or assess the treatment, really helping identify who is most likely to respond and how well it's doing, not just to your point, pass, fail, or it's good or it's not good. It really does help make, ideally, maybe not always in a vacuum, but trials ideally smaller, faster, and certainly more precise or targeted for populations and individuals. And to your point, back in the day, like think of big chemotherapies or pain medicine or statin studies. It very much was big population-based, no genetic or molecular endpoints or considerations when it came to those kind of trials. And really, what we're seeing, and I think this is where you'll probably see it go. And again, there's so many different ways that we could talk about some of the cool innovations here, but we're seeing it a ton in like complex imaging and a lot of molecular data. But the imaging piece, when you start adding up time savings and how one, precise. Let's take precise out of it, but which is certainly an important piece. But time saving has been incredible. Like Subtle Medical is a group that we're super aware of and have had great conversations with in the past. They use AI to quantify MRA brain scans for Alzheimer's and MS trials. And you can actually go on their website. Right on the front of their website, it shows two different scans, and it says traditionally it takes, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but 2 minutes and 40 seconds versus like 30 seconds. And you add up the amount of scans that go into a phase 3 trial, real world data, whatever it might be, just that alone, that one biomarker kind of endpoint that you're looking at alone is a huge time savings, which we know is incredibly important in this. And so I think you're going to continue to see, and I know we keep hitting on AI, but AI making its way into making it easier to look at these biomarkers, because I wouldn't say there was hesitation, but there was limitations and there was cost when it came into looking at a significant amount of biomarkers in clinical trials. But with, again, some of these advancements in technology and machine learning and AI, we're seeing it a ton, but we are seeing it a ton from an imaging perspective and viewing imaging, especially in neurodegenerative disorders, and a lot of vendors that are getting tapped on the shoulder because they have these capabilities by sponsors to be able to really do what they're supposed to do, which is bring a ton of precision and speed to a pretty laborious, experience for a physician in the trial beforehand, for sure.
What if you could get rewarded just for being healthier? Meet Galvin, the company using the latest blockchain technology to reward you for taking care of yourself. They help with your mind, body, and soul like a personalized health assistant to track your progress and help you feel better. Galvin's G Plus app rewards you for exercise and assesses your mental health in under a minute using AI and over 2,500 voice biomarkers. If you're feeling off, G Plus gives you personalized power-ups, science-backed techniques to help you feel better fast. And here's the best part. When you prioritize your wellness, you earn crypto. Ready to level up your health? Use promo code GOODMED20 at checkout for 20% off. Download G Plus today at the Apple app or Google Play Store and start your wellness journey with Galvin. Yeah, it's incredible, and I'm glad you brought up imaging because I think that's an area we made just tremendous advances. And the old days of just putting up a scan onto a light box and just looking at it, I mean, those days are long gone. We can generate so much data now just from these images and adding molecular imaging where we actually have different tracers and dyes and markers that we can watch in real time in people. It's just fascinating. And like you said, I think it's opened up, especially places like in the brain where you can't really go in and biopsy and you can't really see what's happening there. And so it's been, people ask me all the time, well, why aren't we better at neurodegenerative disease? It's like, well, it's been really hard, right? Your brain is a hard organ to study. It's not something that you can just go in and take pieces of and not cause more damage than maybe the disease is even causing sometimes. But the imaging has really, really changed a lot of what we can do. And like you said, I think that they're popping up all over new technologies and new capabilities and being able to access the right type of technology for an endpoint that you're interested in has become one of the big focus of running clinical trials is, can these sites and can the vendors provide the type of support that we're looking for? But just talk about the amount of data that can be generated. And then, that's always the big challenge is, what do I do with all this data? And that's really, I think, where AI is really, really amazing is we're good at connecting two dots, right? We can say this moved and this, these two things are correlated with each other. But when there's multiple things moving at the same time, it's hard for humans to recognize that pattern recognition the same way that an algorithm can do it. And I think we're starting to realize there are things that we would have never thought that that we could pull off a standard image, even not these fancy molecular PET images, but even just standard MRI and standard CT scans. There's a lot more information there that we just miss with the human eye or with our standard analysis tools. But it's been remarkable to watch what's changing there. And I would assume that especially in certain places like the brain there's probably 100% of clinical trials in using imaging for looking at specific pathways and changes that are happening now. But it's not limited to the brain; it's everywhere nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's only going to continue to get better, and certainly be a huge help. I lost my father to Parkinson's disease a few years back, and the amount of Googling and trying to find things, and a little bit before Chat GPT, it's a web. It is an incredible web, and we could talk at nausea about what certain companies are doing in this space and partnering participants to trials and different things along those lines. It's incredible. It's incredible, and it's fun. I got a young family to see what they get to grow up in and hopefully have access to is certainly a cool job to have, to be able to hopefully be a part of it for sure.
Well, that's I always like hearing the comments, because I think the positive comments, because so much we get bogged down in all the trials and the challenges that we have, but there's so many good things happening right now. There's so much to be hopeful about, and I think I don't have a crystal ball to say in 20 years, what everything's going to be, but I have a lot of hope that things are going to be a lot better in the future because of the things that I'm seeing today and the technologies that were being developed. Along those lines, where do you see, one of the things that we run into when we're developing a drug is the cost that's associated with all of these steps. The discovery's expensive, the laboratory work's expensive, and then obviously the clinical trial side of things becomes extremely expensive. And I think today, it's not unusual to have per patient costs be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per patient. Like it's in, back in the day when I first started, we were complaining about $25,000 a patient. We were like, it's really expensive. And today I'd take that all day long, every day, right? I mean, it's $250,000 or more, for patients. So where do you see the role of clinical trials in reducing drug costs, and what do you see like happening to actually bring that down? Is that a problem we can actually address in terms of bringing the cost per patient in clinical studies down, so that the overall cost of drug discovery or drug development actually goes down? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll be honest with you. I don't know if I have a great sense of it, but I can certainly what I always go off of what we're being asked for. Again,
Yep.
working in this space, we have our own AI laced within our applicant tracking systems and our sales navigation tools and some of these pieces. And you can start to look at trends, and it automatically has back-end data analytics that puts a file into my inbox every single morning that tells me, hey, you saw an increase this last month in this particular skill set or this particular area, like Salt Lake City or something along those lines. And so I can only tell you from my interactions with these companies, because I don't got the brain to sit at a bench like a lot of the folks on your podcast. But one of the things that we're seeing is again, hopefully AI by no means going to replace and bring upon scare onto listeners, but it's certainly going to be able to supplement and make these things so much faster. And again, I still think you need explainable AI ensures transparency. That's critical for the FDA and the EMA to adopt it. And so that explainable AI piece are your physicians and again, your incredibly smart scientists and individuals that have to be there to be able to, of course, look at AI use ethically and some of those pieces. But I think it would be silly not to say that how the cost of these are going to go down is everything that we just discussed. Can we reduce screen failures, people coming in that aren't prepared for the study? Can we bring trials to people's homes. And so instead of having a window of 9 months to enroll patients, maybe you can drop it to 6 months. These different pieces, I think, again, leading the charge, of course, is technology and AI, I think is an incredible piece. And I think that is probably the one that feels like the most tangible. And I think a lot of stuff will follow from there. I know you and Dr. Chris Gibson from Recursion had a conversation around that in maybe your first podcast. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think this is one of the driving forces in getting that cost down for sure.
No, I think I'm right there with you. That makes a lot of sense. What's your sense? What do you see in the changes of clinical trials being done in places traditionally that we've never done trials before? So obviously the U.S. and Europe has been where we've done most of the drug discovery and development work, but the world is really changing, and there's I think the rest of the world is saying, hey, we can be involved in this as well. And what do you see happening globally right now in terms of clinical trials and people going to places that traditionally they probably have never done clinical work in the past? How's that changing today?
Yeah, a ton. And you've talked about it quite a bit on your podcast. I know you're doing it with your current companies, with North Star in Australia, and that phase one ecosystem that they have that is just special. And a lot of these different places are getting, again, a little bit more comfortable with it. I think that there's been some pioneers in the space in terms of organizations that are taking data from overseas and relaying it to, again, the FDA, and it's being I'm going to use the word allowed for a lack of a better term. I think that you're starting to see organizations just get a little bit more comfortable. I think there was always a fear of quality. I think that is certainly, a piece that was large. And I think there was a fear, and again, this is my own thoughts here of you maybe don't have a direct pathway to approval here in the United States. And I think those two concerns were very limiting. But I can tell you from, again, every single week we get asks all of the time to go overseas, and we're doing a ton of work in Latin America. We're doing a ton of work in Canada, and we get asked all the time. And we can. I would say that we haven't built up our own infrastructure overseas. We have an office in London, and we are lagging a bit when it comes to that piece, because it's becoming, I won't say a norm, but certainly individuals, again, like yourself and what you guys are doing, and a ton of other pioneers of bringing those studies over there. I think it's been a huge ramp, and we've seen, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but certainly a huge increase in the amount of asks that we've had to move overseas and be able to help staff some of the same exact positions, just need them over there. And so it's been
in different places.
You got it. So I think it's only going to increase, and hopefully, because there's a lot of folks that don't live in the United States that are just brilliant, that hopefully they get an opportunity to impact some of this, transformational, hopefully, drug development.
Well, that's awesome. Well, this has been a really fun discussion. Let me end on just one question for you. And I like to ask people, so if there's a young person that's interested in this as, a potential career, what advice would you give them to, how should they prepare themselves if they want to be involved in medical research and clinical trials? What would you tell them in terms of what should they have in their skill set? What should they focus on? And is the future bright? Is it an area that you would say there's a demand for people? Is it something that they should think about?
Yeah, I think 100%. Again, we continue to see drugs being developed. I think that AI, and I know we've talked about it a lot, has really empowered smaller biopharma organizations with efficiencies and being able to get off the ground running faster. We're seeing a ton of early stage companies that continue to reach out to us for support. And so, I'll answer it in two different ways. One thing that you can certainly do is somehow get AI into your life when it comes to certificates and different places like that. It's not just the MITs and the Harvards that have pathways when it comes to AI. I think there's places. ASU just got a NIH grant, $2 million, a little bit over $2 million for teaching AI to doctoral students. And places like University of Florida and University of Cincinnati have certificates for AI. And so I think it'd be silly of me and really not a good path for listeners if they're looking to clinical research to some way, shape, or form add that piece in. But I think, as always, I think there's opportunities to network. The best way to find a job is to network. There's incredible ACRP and SOCRA chapters. They're your clinical research chapters in just about every major city that you can get networked with. You can talk to, you'd be surprised. Clinicaltrials.gov isn't the best, maybe necessarily website when it comes to telling you who's doing trials and where they're at. Anytime that you're in a physician's office, whether it be a women's health physician, you're a family medicine doctor, an orthopedic doctor, talking to them about it, you'd be surprised that a lot of them do clinical trials in some way, shape, or form. And I think, continuing just to be abreast to the information that is coming out. It's a very, very fast changing space. And I think it's only going to continue. Again, where there's more, companies that are spinning out and being able to get more assets and clinical programs into trials. And we're seeing that right now. And that just these pipelines on websites are just adding one, adding another with some of these technology advancements. I believe that we're going to see that we're going to need a need. We already have a need. There are so many unmet roles, just talking about clinical trial sites. There are so many unmet needs at these sites for individuals. And it's a great pathway for someone like me that got their bachelor's degree in a science, that really there wasn't too many paths forward unless you furthered your degree in some sort of master's or medical or dentistry or something along those lines. It's an incredible gateway to getting into an entry-level clinical trial role. But I think adding AI, networking like crazy, and just bringing it up in any conversation with a medical professional, I think is certainly some of the best ways that you can entertain getting into this as a career field for sure.
Well, I appreciate the advice, and I know, that a lot of people are interested in the field of medicine, but aren't necessarily either destined to become a doctor or don't want to be a doctor. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people that's what they have in their mind is that's the only path forward. And there's so many things that you can do to be involved in healthcare and medicine that don't require you to go to medical school or to have even a doctorate degree or be a researcher, trained scientist at the bench. And that's what's exciting to me about medicine is it just brings so many different people from so many different places together, and it's what makes it all work. So happy to have you join us today and talk about a part of medicine that we don't talk a lot about. Clinical research is, it's such an important part of what we do, and every medicine has to go through this process, and there are people behind every step of this, and people like Zeke are the ones that help us find the right people and plug the holes and try to help us execute and get the things done that we need to allow these medicines to get to people. And so it takes a lot of people to see a medicine cross the finish line, and grateful to have your perspective and to have you on the Good Medicine podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite and thank you so much. And hopefully it helps someone out there that listens.
Well, thanks, Zeke. Appreciate it. And thanks to all the listeners. Thanks if you enjoyed today's conversation. Please click your subscribe on whatever platform you're using to listen to the podcast. And we look forward to bringing you more exciting conversations in the future. Thank you very much. That's it for today's episode of Good Medicine. Thanks for joining us as we explore the science and stories behind health, medicine, and innovation. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a great zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please click, follow, and leave a review for the podcast on Apple and Spotify. If you have questions or comments for me, please put them in the comments section on YouTube or reach out on all social media platforms at Good Medicine. Links are in the description. The best way to support the podcast is to check out the sponsors of the show. You can do this by looking at the links in the show notes. That's it for today. I'm Dr. David Beers, and we'll see you next time.